Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. The Killer Women vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, welcome to Killer Women podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with 4 million listeners. I'm your host, Danielle Girard, and today's guest is Gillian McAllister. Gillian has been writing for as long as she can remember. She graduated with an English degree before working as a lawyer. She lives in Birmingham, England, where she now writes full-time. And she is the Sunday Times bestselling author of Everything But the Truth, The Choice, The Good Sister, The Evidence Against You, How to Disappear, and the Richard and Judy Book Club pick That Night. She's also the creator and co-host of the popular Honest Authors podcast. Gillian's latest book, Wrong Place, Wrong Time, is out in the United States on August 2nd. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you for having me.
Such a thrill to have you. This is an incredible book. I want you to tell, before I start to go on and gush about how much I loved it, would you tell listeners a little bit about Wrong Place, Wrong Time?
Definitely. So Wrong Place, Wrong Time tells the story of Jen and Todd. Jen is Todd's mother. She's waiting up for him. He's past his curfew on the night the clocks go back at the end of October. Suddenly, as 2 becomes 1 a.m., he appears on the street outside the house and he murders a complete stranger, much to Jen's astonishment. He is remanded in custody. He refuses a lawyer. He's charged with murder, and Jen returns home distraught, wondering what will become of him and their lives. He's only 18 and his future's lost. She goes to sleep and she wakes up, and it becomes apparent that it is the day before the murder happened. And the next time she sleeps, she wakes up and it's the day before that. And it's Jen's job to stop the murder and save Todd's future, essentially.
I get shivers when you talk about that. It's so interesting. So first of all, one of there's a little bit of theoretical science in here.
A little bit, yeah.
But actually, because it reminded me a moment of Blake Crouch, right? Who of course does this. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he does quite a bit of this,
yeah.
Right? And yet, it is in the sense of this story. This is very much a character-driven. It's not like we're not super sciencey, but the one thing that we do have to sort of come to understand is the closed time-like curve. So how would you explain that to our to listeners in for the dumb of science of us?
Well, I mean, that definitely includes me. I'm not a science person. So essentially, in order to create a time loop in the real world, you would have to exert a huge force. And my explanation for that is, if a mother witnesses her child do something, perhaps in the same way that a mother might be able to lift a car to save her baby, perhaps, and this is now in the fantasy realm,
right.
You could bend time. So that's essentially the very loose science it's based on.
But actually, as a mother, because, and I have a 20-year-old son, I have an older daughter and a 20-year-old son. This moment, I bought it 100% because I feel like that the stress that Jen went through in watching Todd stab that stranger, I thought, yes, of course, if there's any strength, if there's any that super strength, what's the term for it,
hysterical strength.
Yes, hysterical strength. If there's any possibility of that happening in the world, I do believe it would be a mother in protection of her child. So I love that you use that. That was fantastic. So okay, I read the acknowledgements too, and I'm gonna just show everybody this beautiful cover so that they can look for it in their bookstore. But in your acknowledgements, you mentioned that the idea came from watching Russian Dolls and then reading a news piece that involved a knife or a stabbing. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this came to be?
Yeah, for sure. So I did watch Russian Doll, and I kind of thought there hasn't really been a kind of Groundhog Day book in the crime world that I'm aware of. And I can kind of see why, because I think the same day over and over in a book would be repetitive. And I think readers are a bit less forgiving of that than when you're watching TV and you can kind of montage and sort of skip over a lot. But it kept coming back to me that like it felt like an untapped mine. And then when I read a think piece about, it was about a mother whose son had armed himself and killed somebody. And it, you know, it's the second worst case scenario, isn't it? Like the first is your son being killed and the second is him being the perpetrator. And I found
Absolutely.
it, her kind of, you know, I think everybody with a teenager, perhaps particularly a male teenager, is bewildered at times by the mystery of the teenage kind of mind. But I think that would just be so catastrophic to me to not understand how to stop it, because young men do get sucked into arming themselves to feel protected or out of loyalty. And I think I just found it so compelling, and the two kind of stuck themselves together in my head. And then I thought, why not go backwards though? Because all crimes kind of begin in the past somewhere.
Right.
And like every detective novel really sort of goes backwards in that the police look back, and I sort of did it more literally than that, and it just seemed to actually make a lot of sense to me, even though it's a fairly wonky kind of construct.
Well, I had to have been hard to execute. I mean, that was, that was the thing I kept thinking is, wow. And she ends up, it's a day, and then it's a day, and then it's a day, and then it's a week. And really it takes her back quite a long way. And we don't need to give any details. People will absolutely want to have a fresh brain when they get into it, but it is quite, and it is so fascinating that when we follow this back, we realize sort of how far in the past many of these things are seated. So, and in the acknowledgements, you also mention, I mean, in the conversation you have with Holly, who is, I know, the co-host of your Honest Authors podcast, you sort of make it sound like it's going to be in the point of view of Todd, of the kid who is doing and then somehow obviously Jen becomes the protagonist, which to me makes, of course, perfect sense. As you said, as a mother, there's nothing, the two most devastating things are, and they might be tied, right? One is losing your child, which feels, of course, like the worst thing, but watching your child kill somebody would be pretty far up, almost a tie with that kind of horror. So when did Jen take over? How did Jen take over? Where did you sort of realize, I think it's going to be the mother?
I think I knew it couldn't be Todd because it's really a why done it.
Right.
And I sort of don't really like thrillers where the suspense relies on the narrator not revealing facts to the reader. Like I have quite a little patience with that as a device.
It feels like cheating.
It does. Yeah. And it kind of works if they're genuinely unreliable, you know, like the girl on the train.
Yes, exactly. They were very, right.
But yeah, I think a few too many thrillers have just kind of gone, we'll just lie to the reader for 400 pages. Like, so I just kind of thought about who was the most important person in Todd's life. And I think I thought a lot about We Need to Talk About Kevin, which I loved back when I read it.
Right.
And I think, I think that's kind of the compelling kind of notion that you might not know your own child. But I didn't want it to be, Kevin in that book is very damaged and difficult. And I sort of thought it's super compelling if Todd is actually this sunny, unproblematic teen. Right. I found it even more compelling that she just never saw it coming. Like there's not even really a clue. So it kind of fell into place naturally, which is kind of how this book went for me, which it should have been a nightmare to write, but it actually wasn't. Which is the way it goes sometimes. It doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, it really doesn't. And I actually think to your point, even you're talking, of course, I'm here in America where, teenage boys in particular, are off the rails in lots of ways. And it's a very scary time to, I think, be a teenage boy in America. I mean, it's probably a scary time to be a teenager anywhere, I think, but in particular, because of American gun problems and blah, blah, blah. And also the isolation that's happened with COVID and with their screens and all this stuff. I think being a teenage boy is particularly difficult. So it doesn't actually ring untrue to me that something could happen to this, sunny, smart, I mean, he's such a smart kid, right? That all of a sudden he would go sort of off the rails in some way, and for her to realize that all of a sudden he's gone to her, which is, like you said, just so terrifying. So in your acknowledgments, you also say, this is how it is with writers, right? Never at the desk, never at the right time, the ideas come. So I'm curious to know, how do you capture them? I mean, is this, this obviously came together and sort of stuck in your brain, the idea of this, this kid who, this mother and child, this teenager, and then also this sort of time, this going backwards in time. Is it fully formed? Do you let it steep for a while? Are you taking notes on it all the time? Sort of, how do you make that into something that is ready then to sort of start to put on the page?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm actually doing this now. I've just delivered the follow-up to it's a standalone, but to Wrong Place, Wrong Time, and I've had a big idea for the next, and it asks a huge question that I currently don't know the answer to. So I'm actually going through the process now, and I think ultimately, you probably need to make about 5 decisions to write a book. What is the hook? And then, why or who? And then, what kind of happens in the middle? Where does it end up? And I find, who narrates it? Like, those are quite big questions. And I find with Wrong Place, Wrong Time, I actually had the idea quite far out. I was only writing the first draft of its predecessor.
Okay.
So I had a long time to let it marinate. And I think maybe that's why it became a bit of an easier book, because I had made those 5 decisions really organically. Like, I had the idea in the November.
Yeah.
And then the January, I was like, I think it's going to go back quite far. And that was like decision made. Yes. And then, in the February, I was like, this is the reason why he does it. I found like an article that inspired, I can't really say too much, but the reason behind it.
Yeah.
And then, in sort of the March, April, I was kind of like, and this will be the ending. And
you're still working on another book.
Yeah, but it's kind of like, it really is quite a natural process that doesn't take too much of your brain. And it's harder, I think, when you deliver a book and you're under pressure to have the next idea and have the synopsis, and you have to truncate that process and speed it up a bit. And I think that is a lot harder, but I think it's a lesson in trying to, turn your mind to the next idea sooner in the process. I think really actually helped me quite a lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've never done that. I mean, I've always sort of felt like I finished the book.
No, I never had.
There's never room for sort of a next book when you're working on a current book. But I'm having that happen to me. I've had this happen to me now because I have an idea that won't leave me alone. And I agree with you that if you can make a lot of decisions before you sit down and write, it would seem to make things easier. It's not how we normally work. I do understand, though, that you're quite an outliner. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I do. I can't write a novel without an outline at all. But that being said, I'm also a prolific redrafter. So I have deleted every first draft I've ever written.
Well, so I heard this. So tell listeners about your process, because it's a very unusual process, Gillian.
It is unusual, and it's kind of like, do as I say, not as I do. Like, I no way hold this up as an example of what to do, because it's chaos. But I outline forensically. It's a huge synopsis that I do, and then I write a first draft of about 80,000 words according to that outline. And during the writing of that, usually towards the end, something happens where I realize what the book should be, and I trash the whole draft.
The whole draft?
Yeah, I do.
Like, just write the whole thing out the window.
Yeah, I mean, it's still on my computer somewhere, but the document is blank for draft 2. And then something happens to me in the writing that does not happen in the synopsis that enables me to understand what it is I want to do. And then I start a draft 2, 3 months down the line, panic. And then draft 2 is usually the one that is the skeleton of the book. And then I put the flesh on it. So yes, it's quite an annoying process and quite inefficient.
Well, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, it isn't efficient, right? I mean, obviously that, but actually, there's something kind of brilliant to it, right? I mean, it's like you've thrown a piece of clay on the ground that has a basic shape, and then realized, really to make it what it is. And your books, I mean, you're obviously incredibly successful. All of your books have been on the Sunday Times list. So you're doing whatever it is, as painful as it is, Gillian, you're doing something really right. But I think that so do you, but as a writer too, I'm feeling your pain. So do you go back? I mean, so if I was writing from a blank, document, I think I'd be like, well, what was that piece of that chapter? Because I think I might be able to use that.
Yeah,
no.
I mean, I think the prose in my first draft is so scrappy that doesn't happen. Like, it takes me a long time to get the prose right. But really, I mean, they are unrecognizable. The reason that Todd murdered the stranger in the first draft is not the reason in the second draft. And
interesting.
The book only went back 14 days.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's completely different.
Yeah.
So it's very rare that I go and forge for that like one line. And I do find as well as a writer, generally you remember them if they
they're
earn
brilliant.
the place. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there is very little brilliance in my first draft, to be honest.
I mean, I think there's brilliance in, so I mean, and maybe this is your sort of background as a solicitor, because I feel like there's I mean, that's a lot of time of writing, and I feel like many of us, myself included, get a little bit impatient about just being. I mean, you're writing, I mean, you're writing a full time, 6 days a week. I think I heard.
Yeah, I do write 6 days a week. And I would say, yeah, I do think the law has made me kind of okay with a huge time investment, where maybe some other people would be like, I'm going to do 4 drafts, not 10, and I want my weekends or whatever. Whereas I don't know, I do just I sort of am quite willing to accept long hours, I think. And I've tried to play with the process, and it doesn't really work. I've tried to sort of do a slower first draft and kind of trying to think more, and then I end up chucking that, and I've wasted more time. So yeah, it's not, I probably write 400,000 words for every 100,000 I publish. Like, it's really painful.
That is interesting. So yeah, so I was thinking, I feel bad about my out file, and I end up taking big chunks and throwing them in the out file when I know they're not working. And my out file is usually as big as my finished draft, right? So that's that's about 100.
Double.
Maybe 90,000 words for every 100,000 book. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable about that. But I think it's so interesting. And so by writing 6 days a week, though, let's be honest, I do find a book works better when you're in it every day, right? Because it's like, otherwise you walk away and you just don't remember it. All that stuff it's like, taking care of an infant, right? If you're not there every moment, you've missed some little clue about something, right?
Yeah, it's like housework, letting it build up. I think it's I think
it's not as sexy when you say that.
I know people don't want to hear it, I think, but for me, touching the book, if not 7 days a week, then 6 is, and there's not the time off to a writer it's a vocation, isn't it? It's like, I don't know, as a lawyer, you didn't really ever have time where you really switched off, and as a writer, I don't. And even if I try to, I have ideas and think of stuff, and reading is sort of work now, and writing, watching TV is kind of work because of the way my brain works, and the boundaries are so blurred, which is something that I'm trying to work on, but not really doing very well at, because I really honestly don't know when I'm working and when I'm not sometimes.
But you love the work.
The problem. Exactly. I mean, when you enjoy it, it's hard.
Yeah, it is a problem. So, I mean, it's a problem and it's not a problem. And I agree with you. I think, what do you do that's just for fun, right?
Yeah, I don't actually think there is anything.
Exactly. And I
recently tried to only have one room of my house that I don't work in, rather than having one room that I do work in. I thought I'll have one room I don't work in. So I tried the living room, and I was making notes while watching this thing called Slow Horses that's on Apple TV over here. And I was like, okay, I'm working. And then I tried the kitchen and I was voice noting my friend about plot while I was cooking. So I was like, okay, I can't do the kitchen. I was like, maybe the bathroom. But then I had an idea in the bath and got out to write it down. And so now it's like the downstairs toilet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, right? Or is there a laundry room? Maybe all those things. Folding clothes, or is when I get the best ideas. So let's talk about that second job, because I think one of the things that I think as writers, people, when you spend this much time doing something that's very solitary, right? You're by yourself. I mean, you're not, because we don't think we are, because there's all these people in our head, but you really are by yourself. What keeps it interesting? What's the sort of drive to go back once you've tossed an entire book, or made the paper blank again, the page blank? What makes it interesting? What keeps it interesting?
I think it's actually probably fear, which is, that's not the media trained answer, but it's the fear that I will release not my best work. And, I think it's easy to do. 7 bestsellers in, it would be easy for me to release a C rather than A. And I just live in fear of doing that. So I think that is basically what drives the work ethic, really. But also, I have known that feeling when you buy an author's hardback that you've loved the past 5 books and it's not up to the job, and you can see the joins and you feel it wasn't edited or thought through, and it's kind of heartbreaking. And I just don't want that fall from grace to happen to me. Yeah, basically, it's a lot of pressure once you've been, had some really great success. I mean, it's a lot of pressure no matter what, but I can see that. I can see that absolutely. And and I do think that's a little on the editors, right? I mean, there's a point at which it's tempting to edit a big brand author less, definitely. Yes. But they almost need it more, because the sort of more, I mean, not all of them, but many of them sort of, I think they get really comfortable in the not being as concise and not being as sort of strict with themselves as they used to be. And the demands are different, right? I mean, you're sort of a celebrity, and there's more other stuff that has to be done. So you definitely see that a lot. I have less and less writing time now, and I compensate that by basically working longer and longer hours. But I was sent on a tour in the spring, and I still delivered my book, but I just was writing it at midnight, which was not very fun. But the alternative is to be late or to deliver something substandard, and they're much worse alternatives to me. Yeah, you're sort of a perfectionist, I'm gathering. I think so, yeah, which is not. I know a therapist would say I need to work on that, but it's hard when the career rewards that, right? Like no reader doesn't want a perfect book. Right. We do. And I think and you're delivering, so I think you how to do it. It takes the time it takes. And I know you're just a newlywed. Congratulations. I read at the back that you just and I mean, that's a transition, right? Your life is a little bit different than I'm sure you were with your husband for a long time, but I mean, so now it's like, how do you handle how does he feel about this 6 days a week? And he obviously knew who he was marrying, but yes, he did. Yeah, I think so. I think this spring, for the first time ever, my job really did overtake us. I had a tour, we had our wedding that was delayed from COVID, so we got married in September, but we had the party in the spring, and then we didn't expect to, but we'd been on again, off again with this house for all of April and May, and then we were suddenly moving the week before our wedding. So it was really stressful. And I think he did feel he can just leave his work. He can be like, I'm on annual leave. And he's a lawyer, so, he's worked fairly hard. Right. But I wasn't willing or able to do that. So I literally was writing 2,000 words a day while surrounded by boxes. And I do think people that marry writers pay a price. Yes. I would agree. But I mean, on the flip side, though, I took the dog to the vet this morning because I'm self-employed, and he's in the office, and there is a lot of flexibility as well. And I think it's sort of in accepting that weird. She might be working at midnight, but she's not necessarily working at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. It's quite strange, isn't it? Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Well, it is interesting, and I do think that is. I mean, I do think that there is a part of us that it's never set aside. I mean, I think it is, and to care for something, whether it's the cleaning that's always sort of in your mind, like you have to get done,
so it doesn't build up. And whatever is that processes in your brain, some part of your brain is always devoted to something that doesn't belong to really anyone else, which I think is the, and I'm 28 years married next week. So
wow, congratulations.
Thank you. But my husband married a doctor. That's what he thought he was getting. So I was, that was the road I was going down. Yeah, I was, pre-med and
my sister is a doctor.
Yeah. So I never went to
the psyche well.
Yes, I never went to med school, but that was my route.
I see.
And so of course he was like, this is not at all what he expected. And I think we've had a lot of conversations around like, where is your brain right now? And there's those moments where I'm like, can you just give me like 10 minutes? Because my brain has otherwise occupied. But it's an interesting, I think we're a fabulous breed, and, and we're obviously, when it comes to sort of understanding humans or trying to understand humans, that's the best aspects of us, right? I mean, we're not somebody who won't try to get into the perspective of, our male husband at work, or or a neighbor or whatever. So that's what I say is the bonus of being married to a writer, is that if we're not empathic, then we're not doing our jobs, right?
Totally. Yeah, totally. And I think it's a very interesting job as well. Like, he has been privy to some very interesting things that have happened in our lives as a result of my job. And I think he probably feels a bit like he doesn't want to be asked about it all the time, because that, I think you do get a bit of that. But yeah, I do think living with somebody who wants to understand character must be, I think we're quite forgiving, because I always think, well, if he was a character, he'd be just acting out of fear or whatever, like. But yeah, I do think at the same time, like you say, we're not always in the room. And I'm very, very often, some of the best experience of my life, I've sat there and thought, I'm going to write about this. And nothing's off the table, like I had a miscarriage and I wrote about it. And I was saying to my husband, this is like, I know this is like an awful experience, but also like everything is copy, and like I'd lived it, and I could write about it in a way that was not trite. And it's just, you're not entirely in the room, are you? Because that is not actually a very normal thought process when you go through something really traumatic.
Right. And then you're going to share. I mean, that is, and it's the most vulnerable thing. I think sort of, I'm one of those people who sort of is an oversharer, not to the whole world, but to the,
yeah.
But I mean, that's important. Like, so I feel like we empower other people, particularly women, since we're here. And I always have to say, I love men. It's not, but this is Killer Women, so we talk mostly about women. But I do feel like we empower women by sharing our own tragedies, right? And so that the people know they're not alone. Because I think that's, and actually, I want to segue that, because one of the things I thought was so amazing about the book and about your characters, was the sort of sense that Jen had. That she, and I think every working mother has felt this, that she was splitting her time, that she was neither the best attorney she could be, nor the best mother. And that in going backwards, she had this opportunity to relook at the moment she'd missed with her son. And that she carries this guilt, of course, as we all do. And I'm sure men do too, but in particularly mothers and women, both that were, they were missing these moments. But I also love, there's a moment when Todd's mother's at the school, and it's Todd's friend's mother, Pauline, Todd's friend Connor, and Jen sees, or Pauline is so relieved to see Jen, right? She comes up and says, "I'm so good to see you," because it means there's another mom with whom she can be honest, right? And that resonated so deeply for me, because I feel like we sort of hold this like, oh yes, we're mothers and workers, and we're holding it all together, and there's no problem, and yet. Pauline says very clearly, like, I'm having a moment, and I don't want to show anybody else. But thank God you're here, because I can be honest, which I think, was unusual. I mean, of course, then I'm like, how many children does Gillian McAllister have? Because it felt
0,
like,
right.
But you obviously tapped into that. So where does that, where did that come from?
Where does it come from? It comes from a very long, I think, obsession with whether or not I wanted to have children. And talking really candidly to the women in my life who, I would say the real taboo stuff, like, because I resent giving up my time. I mean, what if I transfer that to the baby? And having friends that would hold that taboo and not go, you can't say that, or it's a blessing, and all of that kind of contrite stuff.
Yeah.
I think I got honesty back from those mothers about, yeah, I did really, really lose my temper with my 2-year-old today because he threw the rain cover off his pushchair 9 times in a row. And in the end, I went, forget it. We've all been there, but you don't put it on Instagram.
No, but we should.
Because society does still judge women in, a way that they don't judge men. Men don't get asked who's looking after the children, etc., etc. So it was the very great friendships in my life that I kind of mined for those details, plus my own fears. I think on my own, I wanted to redeem Jen, because the fact that she loves Todd and Todd loves her means it's okay. Like, she didn't do the wrong thing. And that was the most important moment for me in that book.
Yeah. And I actually think, if any mother, I mean, stay at home or working full time with 3 nannies, whatever, I think if any mother is truthful and honest, she has felt that, right? She has felt that pull of, and I think if not talking about it doesn't really do anybody a service.
No, it really doesn't. And it's weird because in any other sphere of your life, if you had major surgery and then were given an elderly relative to care for, or, if you were just woken up every 2 hours, you would sometimes feel frustrated. But in the motherhood arena, that becomes a taboo. And I, as a sort of outsider, I found that very strange. Like, why can't women show their true emotions in this sphere?
And that fear about sort of how we're doing it right or wrong oftentimes pits women against each other, right? Like, you remember the sort of famous Oprah where she had the working mothers versus the stay-at-home mothers, and neither side could be like, well, you're doing it, we're all doing it right. We're just doing it differently. And so it's sort of like the quote that says, women could run the world if we could just get along, because we have such fear about our own sort of, success in this motherhood arena and doing it right. And, and so we basically pit ourselves against women doing it differently.
Yeah. And maybe sometimes we get it wrong because that's life. You're not the best lawyer every single day. And the standard that women hold themselves to is like, maybe today wasn't the best for the baby. Maybe I had a shower while it cried and I really needed to wash my hair, it is very strange to me that it is a perfectionist standard.
It is.
And I, as a perfectionist, I can see that. But I think, it even comes from the midwives and, friends, and it's kind of everywhere. Like,
you have to breastfeed and you should have natural childbirth and all of those things. Yeah, it is, you're sort of destined to fail. I don't know, I mean, if that's the standard, everybody fails, because there's no mother who hasn't stuck her kid in front of a, video so she can, go and walk,
take a call or whatever. Go and lose her mind in the garden. I know I could pontificate about it for days, because I do find it very, like, the standards are just all over the place.
And they're not reasonable, they're not unfair. I always feel like Americans are the worst at that, so it's nice to hear it's an international problem, because it is. You guys have, I mean, at least here, in addition to sort of now we're restricting women's rights, we don't have, there's no sort of maternity leave or family leave. There's no paternity leave either. There's no universal health care, no universal childcare. It's like we really are just stacking it up for women to fail. And that is, even if we are somebody who decides we're going to repress women, which it seems like there's a lot of those in my country right now, it doesn't do any favors for the male children that we're raising, right? If the goal is,
it's very strange. Like, if it's pro baby no matter what, then have maternity care. Like, it's like it all unravels as soon as you turn your lawyer's mind to it. Like, well, if you believe this, then why aren't you doing this?
Pull just a tiny thread and it all falls apart. Right. It's a really, it's a very, it's a very challenging time to be American. So, okay, so let's talk about America, because I'm curious. So this is, obviously you've had incredible success. And this isn't your first US release, right? I think you had another book release. So what is the, we're this country, I'm so down on it right now, but what are the goals for US publication? Are you just, looking to reach a larger audience? Are you hoping for something specific?
Totally, just to reach as many people as I can and kind of, somebody in the week after the UK release wrote to me and said, I'm parenting my son differently because of your book. And that meant so much to me, that message. Just reading a book and it changing your perspective is just, it's wild to me that that's happened. And if that happens in America once, then I'll be happy.
Well, it will happen in America 100%.
Wow.
That's really exciting. How do you, so I mean, it's, how do you view our your place in our market? Because we're the American thriller, and obviously lots of UK thriller writers do really well here, but how do you view sort of our market versus your market?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that you guys are more forgiving of the kind of genre crossing, maybe, that, like Sarah Pinborough did really well in America, and that book was kind of not one thing or another, not particularly a thriller or horror or speculative. And I think I kind of admire that inclusivity of like, well, just, I'll read this thriller that has these elements, and I kind of don't really need to think too much about what genre that is. I think British readers are a bit more fussy about genre, maybe. So yeah, and I think the cover's totally different, and that's interesting too to me. Like, I don't know about American covers, so whenever I'm sent them, I always think looks good because I don't know.
Right,
but it's totally different to the UK jacket.
Yeah, I haven't seen the UK jacket. I mean, I love I'll have to check it out, but I love the clock with the house and the window, which of course features so prominently in the story. Well, I mean, it's super exciting. I hope the word gets out all over, because I do think like you said, maybe we're not so picky about what genre it is. What we really want is a really good book, and that is 1,000% what you've written. It's a really good book. So you're also a podcast host. Tell us a little bit about Honest Authors. I'm gonna get on there, but it's you and a friend, Holly.
That's right, Holly Seddon. We bill ourselves as it's the only podcast in the UK where two traditionally published best-selling authors kind of tell all. And we started it because we realized starting out, we didn't really know how foreign rights worked, or what a royalty statement should look like, or what your initial orders should be from shops, and all that kind of nitty gritty. And we just ended up talking about it and basically broadcasting that. And we've kind of had a lot of industry experts on. So we had an editor here from a UK Big Five who told us like precisely what happens at an acquisition meeting, and how the targets work, like, with what the sales figures, like how they marry up with targets. It was fascinating. And then over the past season, we've been doing process. So we had Lisa Jewell on last week, and we basically said to her, like, from the moment you get the idea, what is the next thing you do? Like, what is the email you send,
Right.
And then when you've kind of fleshed out your book, how do you write chapter 1 and where, and the real nitty gritty of process, which it's been fascinating, because my process sounds crazy, but most people's does. Like nobody has like a kind of formula for it. So yeah, it's been really, really, really fun. And I think a lot of people have learned a lot, and a lot of kind of debut authors sort of coming up under us are sort of reaching out and, learning via the podcast. So it's a total honor.
I mean that I'm 16 books in, and I think it sounds fabulous. I'm going to go listen to what the acquisitions meetings look like, because it is interesting. People don't really. It's another thing that
sort of talk about it.
We don't talk about advances or orders or any of that. And I do think, again, it's something that sharing information. It's of course not necessarily in the publishing company's interest for us all to know all of these things.
Yeah, but I think that's right. But we were quite surprised by we'd get a reviewer on who works for a national paper and say, what gets a book to the top of the pile? And they were actually, the more you ask, the more transparent people kind of actually were. And you realize that it's okay to peek behind the curtain, it's like everything's better for it, we think.
I agree. Well, I'm really looking forward to that, and it's on, I assume, all of our podcast channels. We can find it anywhere. Well, I my friend Vanessa, she said it's amazing. So I'm now I got to get caught up. I'm I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so tell us, it sounds like you're already, the next book turned in and you're working on the next book. It's fabulous. But tell us, can you tell us what's next for you?
Yes, I can. It's called Just Another Missing Person. And it's about a police officer called Julia, who years before she covered something up for her teenage daughter. And she is assigned a missing person case in chapter 1. There's a woman called Olivia who's 22 and last seen on CCTV, and then she disappears into an alleyway that has no end. So it's like a dead end alleyway, and she never comes out. And she just starts that case, starts kicking it off, you know, looking at the CCTV and starting the searching and all of that. And she leaves the station and she gets into her car, and there's a man in there wearing a balaclava, and he says, "I know what you did for your daughter, and now you're going to do everything I say on this case." So she becomes de facto corrupt. But it contains the best twist I've ever written in the middle, in my opinion.
Okay.
The missing woman is not dead and she hasn't run away. And I needed a third answer and I found one.
Okay.
So yeah, I really like it. So I'm just doing my line edits now. So I hope readers will like it too.
Oh, I'm sure that, well, I just say the twist, this one got me. So I'm not gonna, you know, I mean, I was like, oh, now I understand. It was, which is, you know, fabulous. Anyway, and the relationship also, I feel like between the whole family unit is really, there's so many really wonderful things in here that felt very genuine. So I'm really impressed, because I do, it's sort of like how I read a male author and think, oh, what's he getting right and what's he sort of getting wrong about women. And I have a very good friend and critique partner who's male, and I'm always like, that's not quite right, you know. And it's,
we don't look at ourselves in the mirror all the time.
Yes, exactly. So I do, you know, find it's, and I think it's in the same as useful for somebody to read our male characters but I think you know, you're the way that you capture parenthood and family. I mean, not that you don't have a family, but the motherhood part of it, I feel like is really genuine and impressive. And I think your candor about, you know, Jen's difficulty, and obviously you've confronted that on your own in a different way, is empowering to people who will read it. So I think that's,
thank you. I hope so.
It is. And when we can give people that sort of sense of like, you know, you can do everything right and something can still go wrong, that's when we sort of remind people to be human and not perfectionistic, because that doesn't really get us anywhere, right?
Exactly. The more we say the taboo, the less power it has, I think.
So true. So tell me so it probably comes out in the UK first, the next one, Just Another
I think it's May in the UK. I don't actually know when it will be in the US yet. So watch this space. Next summer, autumn, probably.
So exciting. So exciting. Well, God, Gillian, it was so fun to meet you. I'm going to go and plug into Honest Authors.
Thank you.
This is, I mean, really, there are, and Lisa Jules says on the cover, one of the best books I've ever read. And I think she has it right. It's really, it's a compulsive read. The pace is really strong, but you know, it's hard to do that and also sort of really get to the depth of characters. So I think, you know, you deserve all the accolades that I'm anticipating you getting. So
thank you very much.
Really fun to meet you. Maybe you'll come back, I hope.
I'm sure I will.
The next one. And in the meantime, tell everybody where they can find you. I'm assuming your website, social media. Where are you?
Yes, so I'm at Gillian M Author on Twitter and Instagram, GillianMcAllister.com, and just put Gillian McAllister into Facebook and it will come up.
Fantastic. It was really lovely to chat with you. And for everybody listening, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with our guest, Gillian McAllister, whose new book is absolutely a must read. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you.